After my husband passed away 10 years ago, my life became quieter than I ever expected. The house that once felt warm and full of laughter now echoed with silence. For 40 years it had been our home, a place where my husband and I raised our son, Daniel, celebrated holidays, and shared thousands of small everyday moments. After he was gone, the house felt too big for just one person. Still, I tried to keep living the best way I could. I kept a routine. Every morning I woke up early, watered the plants in the yard, and made myself a simple breakfast. I spent my afternoons reading, knitting, or watching the neighborhood children play outside. Sometimes I baked cookies and shared them with the neighbors. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was peaceful. Daniel used to visit often when he was younger, but after he married Melissa, those visits became rare. I tried not to take it personally. People build their own lives. I understood that. Melissa had always been polite on the surface, but there was something about her that made me uncomfortable. Her smiles often seemed forced, and sometimes when she thought no one was watching, her expression changed into something colder. Still, I welcomed them whenever they came. Daniel was my son, after all. One Tuesday afternoon, I stopped at the grocery store like I always did. I bought a few vegetables, some bread, and milk. As I stood in line at the checkout counter, my eyes wandered to the small display of lottery tickets beside the cashier. I had never been someone who believed in luck, but something about that moment made me pause. Why not? I thought. I bought a single ticket and tucked it into my purse. I didn't even check the numbers that night. Honestly, I forgot about it completely. 3 days later, I was watching the evening news when the lottery numbers appeared on the screen. Suddenly, I remembered the ticket sitting in my purse. Curious, I walked to the kitchen and pulled it out. I sat down at the table and started comparing the numbers one by one. The first number matched, then the second, then the third. My hands started shaking. By the time I reached the last number, my heart was beating so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Every single number matched. For a long moment, I simply stared at the ticket in disbelief. I checked again. Then again. Then I grabbed my glasses and checked a fourth time. It was real. I had won the lottery. For $1 million. I began to cry, sitting alone at my kitchen table. Not because I suddenly felt rich, but because for the first time in years I felt safe. I no longer had to worry about medical bills, repairs on the house, or whether my small retirement savings would last the rest of my life. The money meant freedom. I thought about traveling somewhere warm by the ocean. I thought about donating to the hospital where my husband had been treated before he passed away. I even considered finally fixing the old roof that had been leaking for years. It felt like a miracle. Of course, news like that doesn't stay secret for long. Within 2 days, Daniel called me. "Mom, I heard something interesting," he said. His voice sounded different than usual. And when he told Melissa about the lottery, everything began to change. Because suddenly, they weren't just visiting their mother anymore. They were visiting someone worth $4 million. 2 days after Daniel called, he and Melissa arrived at my house unannounced. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard the doorbell ring. When I opened the door, Melissa walked in first without waiting for an invitation. Daniel followed behind her, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Well, Mom," Melissa said with a wide smile, "we heard some very exciting news." I nodded slowly. "I suppose you're talking about the lottery." Daniel sat down at the kitchen table while Melissa leaned against the counter, watching me carefully. "That's right," she said. "For $1 million. That's incredible." I poured 3 cups of tea and placed them on the table. "It still feels unreal," I admitted. For a few minutes, we talked casually about the win. But I could feel something building in the room. Melissa kept exchanging glances with Daniel. Finally, she leaned forward. "So, when are you transferring the money?" I blinked. "I'm sorry." Melissa sighed like she was explaining something obvious to a child. "Well, Daniel is your son. Naturally, the money should go to him." For a moment, I thought she was joking. But her face remained completely serious. I let out a small laugh. "I'm not giving away $4 million. The smile instantly disappeared from her face. "Excuse me. I worked my whole life," I said calmly. "This money will help me live comfortably in my old age." Melissa's eyes narrowed. But Daniel deserves it, she argued. He's your child. Yes, I replied gently. And I've supported him his entire life. Daniel shifted nervously in his chair. Melissa, maybe we should. But she cut him off. That money could buy us a bigger house, she continued angrily. We could invest it, start a business, secure our future. I shook my head. I'm happy for you both to build your future. But this money is mine. Melissa stood up so quickly that the chair scraped loudly across the floor. You're unbelievably selfish. The words stung more than I expected. I'm not being selfish, I said quietly. I'm being responsible. Daniel stood up as well, clearly uncomfortable. Maybe we should talk about this later, he said. Melissa glared at me one last time before storming toward the door. As she stepped outside, she turned around and said something that sent a chill down my spine. You'll regret this decision. At the time, I thought it was just anger talking. I had no idea that those words were only the beginning. After that visit, the phone calls started almost immediately. At first, it was Daniel calling. He sounded nervous every time, as if he didn't really want to be having the conversation. Mom, Melissa thinks maybe we could talk again about the money. I always gave the same answer. My decision hasn't changed. Soon, Melissa stopped letting Daniel call alone. I could hear her voice in the background, whispering instructions. Tell her we need it. Ask her about helping family. Then she started calling me herself. Unlike Daniel, she didn't bother pretending to be polite. You're being incredibly unfair, she said during one call. How so? I asked calmly. You're sitting on $4 million while your own son struggles. I frowned. Daniel isn't struggling. He has a good job. That's not the point, she snapped. The calls came almost every day. Sometimes she begged. Sometimes she argued. Sometimes she simply yelled. One evening, she arrived at my house alone. I was surprised to see her standing on the porch. Melissa? She walked inside carrying a folder. Without saying a word, she placed several documents on the kitchen table. What are these? I asked. Transfer forms, she said. I stared at her. You expect me to sign these? Yes. Her tone made it sound like the matter was already decided. I slowly pushed the papers back toward her. No. Her eyes darkened instantly. Do you realize what you're doing? Yes, I said calmly. Protecting myself. For several seconds, she just stared at me. Then she leaned closer. You're making a huge mistake. I felt a strange sense of unease. Melissa, this conversation is over. She gathered the papers slowly, but before leaving she turned and said something that made my stomach tighten. You'll regret refusing us. The way she said it wasn't emotional. It was cold. And for the first time, I started to feel afraid of my own daughter-in-law. 1 week later, everything exploded. It was late evening when someone knocked loudly on my front door. I wasn't expecting visitors, so the sound immediately made me uneasy. When I opened the door, Daniel and Melissa were standing there. Melissa pushed past me the moment I opened it. We need to talk, she said sharply. Daniel followed behind her, avoiding eye contact. The tension in the room was obvious. What's going on? I asked carefully. Melissa crossed her arms. What's going on is that you're ruining your son's future. I sighed. We've already discussed this. No, she snapped. You refuse to listen. Daniel rubbed his forehead nervously. Melissa, maybe we should calm down. But she ignored him completely. You're sitting on $4 million while your own family struggles, she shouted. You are not struggling, I replied firmly. Her voice became louder. You could change our lives. And I intend to change mine, I said. That sentence pushed her over the edge. Melissa suddenly stepped forward and grabbed my arm tightly. Just sign the papers, she yelled. Pain shot through my arm as she squeezed. Melissa, let go of me, I said. Instead, she twisted my arm harder. Sign them. I tried to pull away. Stop. You're hurting me. Then suddenly, crack. A sharp, horrifying sound filled the room. A wave of pain exploded through my arm, so intense that my knees gave out. I collapsed to the floor, screaming. My arm hung at a strange angle. It was broken. Daniel stared in shock. Melissa, what did you do? She stood there breathing heavily, staring down at me. For a moment, No one moved. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. Maybe now she'll listen. At that exact moment, a neighbor who had heard my scream knocked on the door. And minutes later, the police arrived. By the time the police arrived, I was still lying on the living room floor, clutching my arm and trying to breathe through the unbearable pain. Every small movement sent another wave of agony through my body. 2 officers rushed inside while a neighbor stood anxiously near the doorway. "What happened here?" one of them asked quickly. Before I could answer, Melissa spoke up. "She fell," she said immediately. She lost her balance and landed on her arm. Her voice sounded calm, too calm. The officer looked down at me carefully. My arm was twisted in a way that clearly didn't look like a simple fall. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" he asked gently. I opened my mouth to speak, but the pain made it difficult to focus. Before I could say anything, Daniel suddenly spoke. His voice trembled. "That's not what happened." Melissa turned toward him in shock. "Daniel," she snapped. But he kept going. She grabbed my mom's arm. They were arguing about money. The room went completely silent. One officer looked at Melissa. "Ma'am, is that true?" Melissa's face turned pale. "That's ridiculous," she said quickly. "He's confused." But the officers had already noticed the swelling in my arm and the obvious distress on my face. An ambulance had been called, and the paramedics arrived moments later. As they carefully placed my arm in a temporary brace, one of the officers stepped toward Melissa. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." Her eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "I'm afraid we are." He gently but firmly placed handcuffs on her wrists. Melissa started shouting immediately. "This is insane. She's lying." But no one was listening anymore. As the paramedics carried me toward the ambulance, I glanced back toward the house. Daniel stood in the doorway, his face pale and filled with regret. Melissa was still shouting as the officers led her toward the police car. "You'll regret this," she screamed. But as the ambulance doors closed and we drove away, I realized something painful. Greed had destroyed whatever fragile piece our family once had. And things would never be the same again. The months that followed were exhausting. My arm required surgery and weeks of physical therapy. Even simple tasks like cooking or brushing my hair became difficult. But the physical pain wasn't the hardest part. The emotional damage was worse. Soon after the incident, Melissa was formally charged with assault. The case moved slowly through the legal system, but eventually the trial date arrived. Walking into the courtroom was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life. Melissa sat at the defendant's table, avoiding my gaze. Daniel sat nearby, looking tired and stressed. During the trial, the doctor who treated my arm testified first. He explained to the court that the break was caused by a forceful twisting motion, not a fall. That alone weakened Melissa's story. But the most important moment came when Daniel was called to the witness stand. He looked incredibly nervous. For several seconds, he simply stared at the floor. Then the judge asked him to describe what happened that night. Daniel took a deep breath. "Melissa grabbed my mom's arm," he said quietly. The courtroom became completely silent. "She was angry about the lottery money," he continued. Melissa stared at him in disbelief. "You promised you wouldn't say that," she whispered harshly. But Daniel didn't respond. After hearing all the evidence, the judge made his decision. Melissa was found guilty of assault. Her sentence was 2 years in prison. As the officers escorted her out of the courtroom, she turned and glared at both Daniel and me. But by then, the damage was already done. Daniel's marriage was over, and the trust between us had been deeply shaken. A year passed after the trial. Slowly, life began to feel normal again. My arm healed well, although it still ached sometimes when the weather changed. Physical therapy helped restore most of my strength, and eventually I was able to return to my normal routine. But my perspective on life had changed completely. Daniel called me many times during that year. At first, I ignored the calls. I wasn't ready to talk. Eventually, one afternoon, I answered. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said immediately. His voice sounded tired and full of regret. "I should have stopped her," he continued. "I should have protected you." I listened quietly. Part of me wanted to forgive him instantly. After all, he was still my son. But another part of me needed time. Trust, once broken, takes patience to rebuild. I appreciate your apology, I told him gently. And I meant it. But healing emotional wounds is never simple. Instead of focusing on the past, I started focusing on something new. The lottery money had given me opportunities one never imagined. I decided to donate a large portion of it to the local hospital where my husband had received care before he passed away. I also funded a small community center program for elderly residents who lived alone, just like I once did. Helping others gave my life a new sense of purpose. For the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. One evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset. The sky glowed with shades of orange and pink as the neighborhood slowly grew quiet. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. Winning the lottery had changed my life, but not in the way most people imagine. It didn't just bring money. It revealed the truth about the people around me. Some relationships broke. Others slowly began to heal. But one thing became very clear. Peace of mind is worth far more than $4 million. And sometimes, the hardest experiences teach us the most valuable lessons.